Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5e, and in particular I want to talk about sharing loot. No, not really. We're not here for that. The reason that there are so many people in the chat room for this live stream is we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons and creating custom magic items. Now, if you are here, you're probably not a player. You're probably going to be a dungeon master. If you are a player, you're welcome to hang about. That's not going to be a problem whatsoever. If you are a new dungeon master to Dungeons & Dragons 5e, so if you are a beginner or a new dungeon master, can I advise you now that you're welcome to watch and listen to the content, but I do not advise creating custom magic items for a new dungeon master. So let's get on to the topic of magic items and creating them and making custom magic items. So how do you make a really cool and interesting magic item for your players? Because it's not really, usually you're making custom magic items for your players rather than for your NPCs or monsters, although you could be, and that's fine. And then of course, if that's the case and it's not for the players and it's for the monsters, then actually a lot of your problems are going to be alleviated. Even though I do discuss a lot of that sort of stuff, you'll find that the problems that you might encounter are going to be significantly less, which is always good news. So how do you create cool and interesting magic items for your players without them being overpowered or just really sort of wrecking your Dungeons & Dragons 5e campaign? Your first port of call should have been, before coming here, the Dungeon Master Guide. You should have read the Dungeon Master's Guide on magic item creation first. And I would advise that if you haven't done so, at some point you really need to. So you can go to the Dungeon Master's Guide and you'll find that pages 284 through to 285 gives you a very sort of broad and general guideline with regard to magic item creation. It doesn't give you a lot of advice about what you should and shouldn't do, but there is a little bit of advice about that, not a huge amount. There's also chapter 7 on treasure, and I would suggest taking a good hard look at those particular pages before going anywhere else with this particular topic. I'm going to make it clear to people, if you are not aware, everything that I present today in this video is my opinion. I am an experimental dungeon master, which means that I will try anything at least twice, and I tend to say to people and recommend try everything no matter what it is at least twice before you chuck it out and decide it's not going to work for you and your group, because some things will work for you and your group, and some things, if you apply in a different group with a different dungeon master, do not work. It's just one of those things. Remember, it's not about, you're not playing in an isolated location. You've got a whole lot of different factors playing into this. So when I give you advice on this today, I want you to take it with a grain of salt. It is done with many years of experience playing Dungeons & Dragons 5e from the very get-go. I have run magic items in a home group with my friends, but I have also done so in a public group many times for many years, and therefore my view is going to be tailored and biased toward the fact that I'm not necessarily sitting with a group of people who are people I've been playing for many years and are used to my style of play, and I have been able to select. Sometimes the people sitting at my table have been people who have just showed up in the game store, and that's who I've had to run at my table. So just want to say it now, my opinion. So what's the first thing we want to sort of deal with? And that is, I want to say it right now because I've done it a lot, and that is there's really no such thing as not making an overpowered magic item in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Okay, there's no way that you can't wind up making an overpowered magic item in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. It doesn't matter if you use some sort of mathematical formula or whether you get lots of experience doing it. At some point it's going to happen, and it will rise its head at a time when you are not really expecting it, where you thought everything was planned out and that you had done all your homework and you've done enough testing and so forth. But there's a reason why this is likely to happen, and that is because players can think they're very clever. There's more players at the table than you, okay? Players can think up clever applications of your magic item. That's going to happen for sure. And as a result, you can't plan for everything that they can come up with. They're going to spend a lot of time once they have magic items on their characters figuring out how to use them and make them as efficient and effective as possible. Magic items affect the game of Dungeons & Dragons 5e in a significant manner. Even something like a common magic item can have a huge effect on your game, which you will not necessarily be aware of. And there's a reason for that, is that you just don't have the resources to play test everything before you apply it to the use of your campaign. Even if you sat down and rolled dice, you don't have all the factors at your hands or disposal to be able to be sure that this isn't going to create a problem. Even magic items that are not custom built will create problems in your game sometimes. And how you approach that is going to be dependent on your experience, how mature you are, how mature and understanding your players are, not their characters, their players, okay? Because the reality is that when you say magic items, that's like candy. It's like a drug. It's an addiction for players. I find that the vast majority of players are always very excited about magic items. There's very few who are sort of like, I could take or leave them, I don't really need to worry about that. So just wanted to say, make it all clear, forget about avoiding to create overpowered magic items, because it's going to happen. And when I talk about this particular topic, I really am coming from the point of view not so much of this video discussing the player's character creating a custom magic item, but of you, the dungeon master. You are the dungeon master, hopefully, and you decide to create a custom magic item. Because when you start having the player's characters create magic items, there are all sorts of problems in place, and it doesn't matter whether it's subconsciously or consciously. You will find that most players are looking for an edge. They're looking for an advantage, because that's the reason to often have a magic item. Their view of magic items is very much tailored based on their experience, and most of their experience with magic items is playing video games. They've spent more time playing video games where magic items are not sparse, they are all over the place, and they're common. You can pick them up. It doesn't take a lot of effort. You don't even have to play for that many hours before you get them. Whereas they have played a lot less of Dungeons & Dragons, where, you know, as a general rule, unless you're playing something like 3.5 or version 4, there aren't a lot of magic items. In the past, Dungeons & Dragons traditionally did not have a lot of magic items available for everybody. Okay? So, that's why I'm saying this video is very much about the Dungeon Master and them crafting and creating those magic items for their players. Okay, I just wanted to also point out that that doesn't mean that you shouldn't allow your players to create magic items ever. I'm just saying that it is more complicated, and you have to really, really take your time with something like that before you apply it to your game. Okay, so let's get on to the first question. There are two main questions that I think that most of you as Dungeon Masters are going to be asking when it comes to creating custom magic items. So what do you need to consider when you are creating that magic item for a player? What are the things you need to actually consider and think about when you're planning the process? First thing I would say to you is, I want you to move slowly. Okay, once a magic item is in play, there is often no good way to remove them without annoying your players. That's just a reality. Now, I know people will say, you know, you can have an in-game reason to remove the magic item. You could use a monster that destroys the magic item. They could suddenly have the magic item stolen. This is often viewed as immature by the Dungeon Master, and that an upfront, out of character with the Dungeon Master and the player, having a discussion with your player and just saying, look, I think we need to change this magic item, we need to, it's a bit too powerful, or we need to remove it from play because I don't think it's going to work, it seems to be creating problems for me. Well, first off, if you are lucky as a Dungeon Master, you'll get a player who will understand that. You're more likely to be heard and understood by a player who's also Dungeon Mastered for some time. Players who have Dungeon Mastered often have a better perspective of the inclusion of custom magic items in a game because they've been through the same things that you have. Now, when it comes to a player, they don't have that perspective. Their perspective is coming from playing video games, where it was common to get drops for magic items all the time. Don't count your chickens when it comes to your player having a discussion with them and them not being annoyed and angry with you because you included a magic item in the game which they now love and do not want to give up, and you say you want to change it and nerf it a bit or remove it completely from the game. You might get a player who is quite understanding and says, look, I totally understand, I get where you're coming from, that's fine. Chances are that will not necessarily happen, and I've had that happen to me more than a few times. I've had players who were quite understanding and others who just got hugely angry and upset, and I'd had a open, honest conversation with them. So I just want to make that clear. Now, how do you solve that problem? Sometimes there is no good solution to that, and you just work through it the best way you can, like any normal human being. Okay, next is sentient magic items, intelligent magic items. When you start creating something like that in your game, they have their own personality, they have their own traits, they have their own goals, their own quirks and so forth. They can be a lot of fun for your players, but often I will find that it's the Dungeon Master who finds them more entertaining than the players do, because an intelligent magic item often tries to have an impact on what the player will do, and players don't really like that sort of thing. Some players do and are happy to go with that, but not necessarily. And they can also put players off. They can really put players off when you start including sentient magic items in your game. Another factor to remember is a sentient magic item, an intelligent magic item, is a lot of hard work for the Dungeon Master to track. So make sure if you're going to use these, just use one in your campaign, because tracking that, it's like running another character. That's right, you are running another character. That's literally like an NPC. The only difference is it's a magic item. Whether it be a magic weapon or magic armor, it doesn't matter. It has literally got its own, it's an NPC you're running. Okay, if the players get too many magic items, which is certainly possible if you start introducing a lot of custom magic items, plus all of the standard magic items that you would find in the Dungeon Master's Guide, it's only a matter of time where they get too many magic items, or they get a magic item that they don't really like or are not interested in, and they're going to want to sell those magic items to somebody. They're going to say, look, I want to go and find a magic item merchant or a nobleman or a king who will buy this from me. And my suggestion to you is make sure that the price is not full price, because they have to sell it back. If anybody's going to buy magic items, okay, from the player's characters, then they need to make their cut and their profit. Otherwise, what would be the point in buying the magic item from them? Another thing you need to consider is, does your world actually have a place and location where they can buy and sell magic items? You are starting to step into deadly territory. We're talking about Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 and Dungeons & Dragons 4e, where there was a trading economy for magic items. So you've now gone from magic items being rare, unusual, and interesting to now they are a commodity that people make and sell and buy. The other thing is your world a location where people don't buy and sell magic items because magic items are so dangerous that nobody wants to touch them. So maybe the players' characters can't sell them. They've got them, but now they've just got to sort of put them somewhere out of, if they're not going to use them, because they can't get rid of them. Nobody really wants to touch them. Maybe simply because many magic items are cursed or have unforeseen circumstances or effects or consequences in your game. Players want to craft magic items. I want to say it again. Players often want to craft magic items, and this is usually a huge trap for a dungeon master. So make sure, if you're going to allow it in your game, that it's very, very rare. I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail, because this video is really supposed to be about the dungeon master creating and customizing magic items for their players, or maybe their NPCs or monsters. So I just want to make it clear, it doesn't matter how your player presents it, whether it be subconscious or unconscious, the chances are they don't fully understand the effect that magic item that they want to craft in your game will have, and also that they are looking for an edge. That is the reason to have magic items in the first place. Okay, so I've said it. It is up to you at this point to decide whether you take it or leave it. Okay, attunement. When it comes to the rules for attunement for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, this will help you control the player's hunger for magic items, and in particular, magic weapons. You can only attune to 3 magic items that require attunement in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. 3 magic items is actually a huge number. The fact that a player might have 1 magic weapon is a huge effect on your game. In fact, it is possible for a character in Dungeons & Dragons to play completely through the entire game and never have a magic item, and they wouldn't even notice it. Sometimes the martial classes might require a magic item simply to get through the damage immunity that some monsters or creatures have. In particular, something like the golems, demons and devils sometimes have damage immunity, and unless you have a magic weapon, you can't get past that. But even the monk at level 5, I believe it is able to make unarmed strikes, and they are classified as magical attacks or magic weapons, essentially. So make sure you use attunement rules, because they are there to help you. Don't ignore them. I wouldn't expand them in any way so that you can have more than 3 attuned magic items at any given time. That's kind of like another trap as well. Alright, let's move on and go, what about magic items that are just mechanical benefits? What happens when you start making a custom magic item and the only thing you've done is create a magic item that has a mechanical benefit? This will result in you essentially playing yet again another video game. You're not really playing Dungeons & Dragons with a story, because what you have created is a magic item that has a +1 or +2 or +3 bonus to attacks or damage or armor class or a skill check or an ability check of some kind or some other feature. Essentially, you've given it a mechanical aspect to the game, and often that will be for combat purposes rather than for utility, such as exploration or a social encounter. All of those, okay, you are distracting and you're moving back towards essentially the video game mentality that our players are used to. So if you want to move away from that and actually make magic items, and this is the reason for making a magic item, right, in the first place, a custom one, is so that your game and what you're doing stands out to your players, so that what you're doing for them is special in some way. And if you really want to make that happen, you're going to have to go past mechanical, and you're going to have to start looking at something else. And the things I would consider a sensible thing to look at are things like giving your magic item, it might be a weapon, might be armor, it might be a wondrous item, it doesn't matter what it is. Give it an interesting name. Spend a bit of time on the internet and actually look for the real names of magic items from fiction, or even from what is classified as history. Even history has what items that are considered to be magical. Excalibur is a good example of that. Nobody really knew exactly what the properties of Excalibur were, other than it allowed King Arthur, and really only King Arthur, to rule and keep hope in the world. So make sure you pick an interesting name, because that actually adds a lot to the magic item you have created. One of the things I found is by giving magic items that I created a name, really meant that my players suddenly realized that this magic item there was only one of them, because there was only one magic item that would have that name, and that was the one that they had. So that's what it makes it so special. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we move on to our last question, and that is players hate magic items that are cursed. They really, really hate them, okay? They can't stand those things. You'll get a small number of players who don't mind having a cursed magic item, or the consequences, there's benefits and there's drawbacks, and the cursed factor, they just role play that and they're happy to go with that. But my experience is, in general, players don't like it. But that should not stop you from creating a custom magic item that has a curse to it. You should still do it. My advice to you, always try everything at least twice before you chuck it out. Now, the reason being is that magic items that are cursed are probably cursed for a reason. There's something that has taken place. They make the magic item stand out. A cursed magic item is far more memorable than a +1, +2, or +3 sword or weapon of some kind. And the same applies to a piece of armor. Okay? If you give it a +1, +2, +3 armor bonus, okay, to AC or whatever, that is not very memorable. But a cursed magic item causes a lot of trouble. And once they get to a certain point, by the time they get to roughly around, depending on the kind of classes that they are playing, between levels, I think it's 5, 6, 7, they should be able to remove that curse. They'll have somebody in the party who can cast remove curse, and then of course they can then ditch that magic item, or they can put it in a nice box and stash it away in their warehouse with everything else if they've got a lot of magic items at their disposal. Another thing I just wanted to quickly say is, when it comes to giving your magic items a name, also give it a backstory. Characters have backstories, NPCs have backstories. Your players' characters often have a backstory, or hopefully they have at least 1 or 2 lines. A backstory is always good, so give your magic items a backstory. It's hugely helpful in making what you're trying to do is essentially make a memorable magic item that will actually do it. Okay, all right. Next question. This is my final question that I will answer for this video. And that is, what makes a really good custom magic item? So I have selected about 18 different things, which I'm going to list now, that make a really good custom magic item for your game. And the first thing I would suggest is, as I said, give your magic item an interesting name. I went onto the internet, spent a lot of time. I had a page full, I think 2 pages of names that I was able to accumulate. If people want access to that, you'll have to let me know. Make your magic item unusual and rare in your world. Make sure that it stands out. Okay, this magic item is the only one of its kind. There isn't another magic item identical in nature in the magical fantasy world that you have created or that you are playing in. There's only this one. So make it rare, make it unusual. Create a backstory for your magic items and give a reason for the existence of the magic item. Okay, why was it created in the first place? Who created it is also a really good question, but give it a backstory and give it a reason for it to exist in the world, rather than suddenly somebody just pumped these things out and there's plenty of them. Okay, so give it a reason to exist. The ring that Frodo carried, okay, the One Ring had a purpose and reason in Lord of the Rings. So do the same with your magic items. As I said before, use attunement for permanent magic items in particular. and not just weapons or armor. Everything that you have a chance to make and create, use attunement. Okay, it's your friend. It will help solve a lot of your issues later on. Okay, number 5, don't just make magic weapons and armor. I know it's tempting sometimes, because that's the thing that most players really want, is I want a magic weapon and armor. Don't just make magic weapons and armor. Create other things as well. There is nothing wrong with making consumable magic items that only have one use, and that they are custom. They don't necessarily come out of the Dungeon Master's Guide. So use that, because, now the reason being, these are things that you can now make that get consumed, and you can control how many exist in the world now. You can decide they can be purchased at a shop, or maybe they can't be purchased. Maybe that will be the only one. Now, I know there's an issue for some players, because they're concerned they may never be able to find another one, and so it stays on their character sheet, and they never use it, because they're always worried that if they use it, they might need it some other time. But trust me, if you give them enough really dangerous and difficult encounters, they will start expending those things, realizing that they are necessary. Okay. Now, I do believe there's a channel that talked, a very small channel actually, that talked about how to use magic items that are consumable, and how to make them things that aren't just left on the player's character sheet. I think it's Zippo. I can't remember the last name, but Zippo. So Google or search for Zippo sometime. He did a very good video on that topic. Okay, magic item formulas. When it comes to magic item formulas in your game, they will crap all over your Dungeon Master's goodwill. Okay? They are a trap, unfortunately. If the magic item that you're talking about is like a consumable item that only has one use and it's very low in power, then a magic item formula that players can get access to might not have a huge problem. But always be careful about magic item formulas for making permanent magic items, because honestly, they will poop all over your campaign and ruin it. And I've had this happen to me, where I've had too many of these things floating around, or I've started the process, and my only choice, after I've tried everything, every piece of advice on the internet and every piece of advice that people have given me, didn't work, and my only choice was to end the campaign, and that's what I did. So I'm just going to warn you now. Magic items, give them an activation word or an action to help steer the action economy. If a magic item requires using up somebody's bonus action, or in particular their action to use the magic item, that's a good thing, because now they have to start making choices. Will I make an attack with my weapon, or will I cast a spell, or do I want to activate this magic item and use it in a combat location or situation, or during exploration? It's not so much a big deal. Certainly it's not really going to affect a social encounter, but combat in particular. So activation words and actions are a really good idea to tie to your custom magic item in your game, and that will help balance things out. Not to say that you're really going to get a balanced game in any case. Anyway, I've already warned you about that. There's no such thing as creating balanced magic items. It doesn't happen. Okay, next, have the magic item change. One of the biggest problems is getting players to stop thinking that their character should have a +1 weapon, or a +1 magic item, or +1 armor between level 5 and 10, and then from level 10 to 15 they should have like a +2, and then from level 15 to 20 they have a +3. This is because, as I said, this is the gaming mentality of Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, version 4, and video games. Okay, so if you don't steer away from that, you're going to cause yourself a whole lot of hassles. And one of the best things you can do, because what they want to do is they want to, if I get a better magic item, I'll dump this one, put this aside, or sell it, or give it to somebody else, and then I'm going to use this better magic item. So have your magic items increase and change with the character as long as they are, say, attuned to the magic item. The longer they carry and use that magic item, the more it will change and alter with them. It is also important not to stack too many changes all at once. So slow and easy wins the race, okay? Slow and easy. Okay, something like a cursed magic items will stop players assuming that having a magic item is a good idea, and they will be much more coy, and as a result it will cool down their attitude to picking up magic items. They'll be much more careful about their approach because they can't use Identify to check if a magic item is cursed, because they can't just spend a short rest to figure out whether the magic item is cursed. They actually have to handle it and use it, and then once they've handled the magic item, the curse is in place, and really now it's a matter of using Remove Curse or doing whatever you have created to remove that curse. This is all, I think I made 90 to 99% of my magic items in my campaign were cursed, and very few of them were not. And as a result, I was able to present more magic items, but just be careful about the use of curses too, because I had players use curses against NPCs and monsters in my game as well, with rather amusing and also disastrous effects. But yes, remember, curses will help. Make sure you include a good sample of them in your creation of magic items. It really, honestly, it will make a huge difference to changing their attitude with regard to the use and application of magic items. As I said before, the players don't really like magic items, but you should still do it. Okay, have a think about who created this magic item. And if you try page 142, it gives you plenty of help on how to figure out who created the magic item. Number 12, I would say, is what is the item's history? Now, I talked about backstory. It's the same sort of thing. Page 142 does a reasonable job of giving you some history and backstory for your magic items when you're creating it. And look, go and use fantasy literature, whether that be books or movies, it doesn't matter, plays, whatever. Go and use pop culture, fantasy literature. It's always an awesome location for getting really good history for your magic items. And I know a lot of people here watching right now are avid readers and probably read an awful lot of books. What about minor properties? What about using and exploiting minor properties? They should not be ignored. If you use page 143, actually minor properties are going to make your magic item stand out. There's a lot of chances of, by using those minor properties, it will help you develop a purpose for your magic item. Why was so much time put into place to actually create this magic item? And the minor properties will really sort of single that out and make it clear to you. So utilize that. I found it really useful. I know my players were not necessarily sold on the concept of minor properties, but honestly, all of this working together in conjunction makes a huge difference. Can you give the magic item an important purpose in your world? I've talked roughly about that before. Okay? There's a reason, particularly with permanent magic items, always make sure you give them a purpose. Why somebody spent so much time creating them. Often a +1 magic weapon in particular will take like a month to create, whereas armor can take almost a year or many years to create. So there had to be a reason why somebody invested so much time. There was a purpose this particular magic item was created. It may have fulfilled its purpose in your world, or it might still have not completed that particular purpose. And your players' characters may be just holding it for now before it moves on, or they may be instrumental in achieving the purpose for this magic item that you have created for your game. So remember, purpose. Can you give the magic item quirks? Absolutely. I would recommend giving your magic item quirks. It's the same thing as making a NPC or character in a game, right? So give it a quirk. They are impactful on the game. Sometimes they will interest the player. They are not necessarily, so players are more usually interested in mathematical sort of effects. That's often what their focus is. Okay, but they are impactful. They do have an effect on your game and story. They will have an impact on the player, not necessarily the impact that they were hoping for because they really wanted the big flashy sword, but still do these things because it's a custom magic item. You're trying to make it special, right? So use them. I already talked really briefly about sentient magic items or intelligent magic items being hard to manage for a dungeon master, so I'm going to skip past that. And then the last two things that I want to discuss, and that is, don't focus on pages 219 and 220 of the Dungeon Master Guide. This is where you find minor and major detrimental effects and minor and major perks, basically. Don't focus on them. Those pages are a sad reflection of your imagination and what you can create. And they are the sorts of things, particularly the ones that aren't detrimental, the minor and major detrimental stuff. The other stuff that are beneficial to the player's character are things the players will absolutely love. And I'm not saying you should not do that. You should. But don't focus on that completely. That is not your goal. Your goal is to create something your player never wants to give up and has to make hard choices and decisions about what they will do with that particular magic item. So that is what I'm suggesting to you, not that you give up on those pages, but don't focus on it. Watch loads and loads of Harry Potter. Honestly, I mean, I don't know if you're necessarily a fan of Harry Potter. I wouldn't say I am a fan of Harry Potter. I've watched Harry Potter in the series. I haven't read their books, but that series of stories has some fantastic magic items in them. And what you'll notice with the magic items that they present in that world is they aren't magic items that are necessarily combat focused. They are sometimes just about just functioning in the world to make life easier. I think that is a really good way of approaching magic items in your game. Now there are standouts. Let's get real. At some point, you're going to start wanting to make magic items that aren't necessarily of a utility basis. So something like the Helm of Comprehend languages, these are standard things in the Dungeon Master's Guide. You might decide to make something else, but it's going to come down to, when it comes to making things like magic armor, I would advise you against making a lot of magic armor that is custom built, or even including a lot of magic armor in your game. Magic armor has a stronger effect and more impactful effect on your game, and will require you to do a lot more work to adjust things than having a magic weapon in the game. So when it comes to using armor, by all means do it, just don't do a lot of it. That's my advice to you. I found that surprisingly that a +1 breastplate compared to a +1 weapon, whether it be a sword or axe, players would always go for the armor because it's so hard to get in the game, particularly for the pre-made adventures, but also too, the benefit to armor class, it's hard to improve your armor class. At a certain point, it's very, very difficult. Usually with something like your attack roll and your damage roll, eventually your proficiency bonus will increase, right? Your proficiency bonus increases, therefore it makes it easier for you to do more damage and to hit more often. So they're not really concerned about that. And if their character is using magic, an ability that uses magic or strength or dexterity for making attacks, they can increase that It's actually not difficult. They'll start out probably about a 16. They can increase it eventually to 18, and more than likely it will go up to 20. And if you start giving them magic items that allow them to increase their ability modifier, then that can be increased again. But changing armor class is actually quite difficult unless you're using spells, and spells don't last forever. They run out eventually, right? They have a duration to them. So when you start thinking about making that Thunderbolt hammer or the Berserker axe, or you start deciding, let's include some sort of shiny thing, yeah. Armor is one of the things that players will gravitate towards the most compared to the magic weapon. I was surprised, but it honestly, it's true. And I know a lot of people will say, what about my magic armor? If I make magic armor or magic weapons and they're an unusual size, do they resize for my player who is running a character who's small size or medium size, or maybe they're playing a character that's large size? Hopefully that's not the case, but I mean, if you're doing homebrew stuff in your game, it's possible. Does armor resize to fit somebody? You make that decision. It's like a custom magic item. It can do whatever you decide it can do. So there's nothing in the rules that necessarily say that would be the case. But I wouldn't steer away from using that as a general sort of tool in your game, so that players can trade with each other and share things, particularly if they decide that something would be more useful to them. So resizing of weapons and armor is not a stupid thing to do. Weapons that glow in the dark. I found that with human characters and those who don't have dark vision, a sword that can glow, particularly if it gives off what do you call it? Is it dark light? Sort of like that funny, I can't remember exactly what it is, but a dark light that doesn't actually sort of shine out quite so strongly. I know players really enjoy something like that, whether it be a weapon or it just be a lantern or it be a little brooch or amulet. All of those things can be hugely useful. Now, if you want to go and check out, whether you be a player or a dungeon master, you can go and check out a lot of my videos. I have like hundreds of videos for players and dungeon masters covering a vast array of different things on the game of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, if you like this video, share and like it. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos. And check your YouTube settings to make sure that you are going to be able to be notified if you do subscribe and hit the bell button. Now, if you want to support my channel, watching more of my videos is probably the best way. I don't do Patreon, but I do have affiliate links down in the description for Amazon and the book depository. You buy stuff, I get a small commission. That just helps me keep this channel going so I don't wind up having to sort of, run on old equipment and stuff like that. Now, this is your opportunity. Ask your questions, give your feedback. I am happy to talk about anything regarding custom or creating custom magic items and the sorts of stuff I have done in the past, or listen to your stories, because I'm sure you might have had a slightly different experience. Everybody does, right? If you're not part of the live chat, use the comments section, and hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.